Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Keeping the Faith podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Fuentes. This is my co-host, Edgar Martinez.
What's up?
Today, we're actually going to be talking about the evidence for Christianity. So over the last few weeks, we looked at some of the evidences for God, and we decided to narrow it down a little bit to the God of Christianity. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the evidence for the resurrection. But before we get into it, just a quick reminder that you guys can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and Facebook. Feel free to leave us a like on our Facebook page, and go ahead and follow us for Bible updates and updates about the ministry and any comments that we might have. Also, feel free to leave us any questions that you guys might have in our Facebook page. We'd really appreciate it, but let's go ahead and throw it back over to Edgar.
Before we do anything else, just to remind all you guys that whatever we're doing here, it's purely for the love of God and for the love of our fellow Christians. So that's one of the things that I did want to mention that before getting into our topic, and so let's start. So for today's topic, we've been for the past 2 weeks we've been reviewing a few arguments for God. We want to make sure that there's evidence and not just only blind faith that God exists. And so, all right, we pulled together a 4 arguments, as I said, this past 2 episodes. And if you want, you can go back and, just check out those 2 episodes just so that you don't miss out on that information. But, all right, let's say we establish there is a God. But, okay, let's say you agree. You even say, okay, that's cool. I think I might believe in a God. But now there's a sort of a question, which God? Because, as you may all know, there is quite a few religions out there that profess that their God is the one, the true God. And you might even hear this argument or this phrase where it says that all religions are fundamentally the same and superficially different. But actually, we should hear this the other way around. We should actually say that all religions are fundamentally different and at best superficially the same. Not all religions think the same thing, and you can check. And I think one of the arguments, or one of the biggest arguments with Christianity, which is what we're going to present today, we're going to present why Christianity is it's true, and why the God of Christianity actually makes more sense with actual evidence. So, just one thing before we go to the actual arguments or the evidence for the Christian God is that if we check, for example, one of these arguments is that the only way, or this is what Christianity claims, that Jesus is the only way to reach God. There's no other way but Jesus. And as you may know, for example, we have like the Islam faith, which of course doesn't think that Jesus is the only way, because they only see Jesus as a mere prophet. So they don't think he even died. The Quran says that the Jews thought he died, but he actually didn't die. So that's one of the things. So the claim of Islam is that you got to do certain more goods than bads, but at the end it's still up to Allah, which is how they call God. It's up to him if he lets you in or not. But you have to be a Muslim, of course. And then we have maybe like Buddhism, which it's essentially almost in a search of a spiritual thing, but they don't even believe in Jesus. But then you might say, all right, well, I guess those are a little bit more extravagant and they go a little bit off. But then what about Jehovah's Witness, Mormonism? Maybe those might be the true ones. They believe in Jesus. They might think, but then we got to check into their theology, and both at least of those two, they believe that the Bible is our true authority. And so once we check on that, and then we check on their theology, we see that there's still, certain things. Like, for example, one of the biggest case for Jehovah's Witness is that they don't believe in the Trinity, as how, actually the Bible says. Even they went a little step ahead and changed their translation of their Bible, and because supposedly, their Bible didn't, or the New Testament didn't incorporate the name of God, which they believe it's Jehovah, and so they wanted to add that. But they went ahead and changed not only that, but a couple of things in there. So in that respect, they don't believe in the Trinity. And so that's a fundamental thing that we can see in the Bible. We can read in the Bible and learn. And then Mormonism, they go ahead into thinking, that you could even become a god, little god. So, there's different theology that we can see that it's not consistent with what the Bible teaches. And so that's why we got to rule out those religions. We're being respectful here. We're not trying to, cause a war or anything like that. But we do want to put truth out there and not, just be with that blind faith. We want to actually check. And so we've checked that. So now we want to present an argument, or more as arguments, evidence. And so that's why we decided to, one of the evidence that we want to bring out is the resurrection of Jesus. And Jonah will give us a few points that of why we believe, Jesus resurrected. And that is one of the biggest evidence of why we believe in Christianity. So without further ado, here you go. Pass it on to you, Jonah.
All right. Well, you guys heard it here first. Keeping the Faith podcast, starting war since 2020.
Not at all, guys.
All right. Yeah. So let's get started. So today I want to present what's known as a minimalist case for the resurrection. I don't want to go too much into all the information, because the truth is there's actually a lot of points or a lot of evidences that we can point to. But I think I'm going to keep it down to just 3 for this week. And maybe later around Easter, if we want to come back and revisit this subject, we can get into more detail. Okay, so actually, before we get into the evidence, I want to prepare us for how we should receive the evidence and the importance of it. The truth is, the resurrection really is something important when it comes to Christianity. In 1 Corinthians 15, we actually read about how Paul, one of the main apostles for the Gentiles, or the people who aren't the Jews, he actually goes as far as to say that if Jesus Christ had not risen from the dead, then our faith is useless. Our faith is, we are most to be pitied out of all people. So our very faith actually hangs on the idea or the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then all this is useless and we're just wasting our time. So I think that shows us just how important something like the resurrection really is for Christians. There's actually been movies made about this where people will go out trying to disprove the resurrection and, failing, because the truth is, when we're open to receiving the evidence, we're going to see just how rock solid it really is. But I don't want to make light of just how important the resurrection really is. And one of the things, too, is when we hear about this, it can actually be kind of scary hearing that, our whole faith rests on the idea that Jesus rose from the dead? Like, what if he didn't? Then are you telling me that all of this is fake? And I remember, first hearing about that, and that's one of the first thoughts that maybe could possibly run through your head. But the truth is, it is scary on one side, but at the same time, it's actually a good confidence booster because, like I said, when we look at the evidence for the resurrection, it is rock solid. And when something like the resurrection, someone dying and rising from the dead 3 days later, is true, I think that kind of lends itself to kind of explaining how the rest of the Bible could also be true too. In a sense, when it comes to miracles and stuff, a lot of people will say that miracles aren't possible and stuff like that. But if something like the evidence for the resurrection is strong enough to support that Jesus did rise from the dead after dying, that really lends credence or, possibility for all the other miracles in the Bible as well. So, like I said, our faith should be rested on this idea that Jesus truly did rise from the dead. And then when we have doubts about other parts of the Bible, maybe some stories in the Old Testament, we can look at the evidence for the resurrection, and it can give us confidence in those areas as well too. So that's just something we need to keep in mind. But in the same time, it's also a good thing that Christianity is falsifiable in a sense, because a lot of new religions these day and age, like New Age spirituality and all that stuff, they're created to not be falsifiable because they are determined based on one's feelings or, one's subjectivity about how one sees the world. So the way that they're built up and constructed, you're not able to bring it down. You're not able to prove it false. And that's exactly what they're looking for, because they don't want people proving their ideas false. Oh, well, truth, yeah, sure, that's cool, but it's about what I feel on the inside. And that's the kind of stuff that they'll say. But when we're looking at truth claims, something should be able to be proven false in order for it to be true. And I think as reasonable humans, we should be seeking truth over anything else. Regardless of how it makes us feel or regardless of how we think about it, we should be striving for truth, especially when there are consequences like, for example, heaven and hell. I don't want to live my life based on feelings and then spend the rest of my life in hell. So I think we really need to put a lot of effort and thought into seeking truth. And I'm convinced that when we do seek truth, we will find something like Christianity, which, like I said, is also falsifiable. I mean, if you want to take a stab in trying to prove it false, by all means, go ahead and try it. But I think that should be something that we look for when we're determining how true or how reliable or how reasonable it is to be a Christian, as compared to, this sort of new age kind of spiritual person, that, like I said, is all based on feelings and unfalsifiable. The second thing I want to leave you guys with is, when we're looking at the evidence for the resurrection, I want to go ahead and ask you guys, before I even point at any evidence, I want to ask you guys, what percent do you actually believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Now, the truth is, this is a subjective question, so every answer is going to vary. Some people are going to be like, yeah, amen, 60, 70, 80%. And other people are going to be like, hey, I don't know, like 5, 4, 3%. And the thing is, those are all right answers, because it's about how you feel about how Jesus truly rose from the dead. However, even though all those answers are right, there's one that isn't right, which is, 0. Now, the reason I'm saying that, I want to explain it a little bit. When we jump into evidence and we're going in ahead of time thinking that the possibility of this even happening is 0, we're going to harden our hearts to the evidence. Somebody could present us rock hard evidence, and if we're jumping into it saying, there's no possible way that Jesus rose from the dead, then yeah, of course, we're going to hear the evidence and we're going to be numb to it, because we're already putting ourselves in a position where it's not going to affect us. So if we truly want to be reasonable people and look at the evidence for this type of stuff, we need to start from a place where, okay, look, maybe I don't believe the resurrection happened, but it's like at a 1, 2, 3%. And I think when we open our hearts in that manner, we're going to be a lot more open to the evidence. And I just want to give you guys a quick example. Let's say somebody's trying to present me evidence for aliens. And I'm like, no, there's a 0% chance that aliens exist. No, you're essentially saying no matter what you tell me, I'm not going to believe it. So I'm declaring that there's a 0% chance that aliens exist. So what happens? Somebody could show me a video of UFO, or somebody could show me a landing of a UFO, or maybe a dead alien body. And because I believe in my heart that there's a 0% chance that aliens exist, I'm going to look at all this evidence and I'm going to be like, yeah, that's, it's fake. It's baloney. It's not real. And that, just like I said, that really leaves us in this position where we're not going to be able to receive the evidence for the resurrection. So I guess essentially what I'm asking is that you guys just kind of soften your hearts towards it. Like I said, even if you want to think the possibility is like close to 0, that's fine. But just don't let it be 0, because if you let it be 0, you're just closing your heart to the possibility. And no matter what I say, even if Jesus himself came to you in person, you wouldn't believe it. And I think that's a dangerous position to be in, and a bad one. And, but yeah, I just wanted to start with those two things, but let's get into the evidence, because we're already about like a lot of minutes in. Okay. So the way I'm going to go about this is I'm actually going to present events in history that we know that happened. And it's just a matter of explaining why these things happened. I want to make sure that that's clear. I'm not trying to convince you that these 3 or 4 things I'm going to talk about actually happened today, because these things are like, they're set in stone. They're consensus among scholarship. They're not really even really debated. except around lay people like us, common people that don't study this for a living. But as far as among scholarship, these facts aren't really things that are debated. And like I said, it's not a matter of convincing you that these things happen. It's a matter of, okay, we know that these things happened. Now what best explains why these things happened? And that's a mentality I want us to have going into this. But let's go ahead and start with the first one. Now, before Jesus can actually rise from the dead, he first of all has to die. And this is the first fact that we're going to go over really quickly, is that Jesus actually did die on the cross under Pontius Pilate, which is what the Bible tells us. This is something that scholars have looked at the evidence, and even atheist scholars, people who don't believe in God, there's a atheist New Testament scholar who goes by the name of Gerd Ludemann, who will go as far as to say that the idea that Jesus died on the cross is the most undisputed thing in ancient history. So out of all the things that we know that happened in history, the fact that Jesus died on the cross is one of the most undisputed, if not the most undisputed event that took place that we can know for sure happened. So, like I said, we talked a little bit about this in our series for Jesus, his final days here on earth. If you want to go back and listen to that, we talk about more in detail about how we know Jesus died, some of the things that they did that Jesus, to know that Jesus actually did die and, didn't just stay alive on the cross. So you guys can check out that episode if you guys want to. But I just wanted to say that we know, first of all, this goes against the whole people that will try saying that Jesus didn't even exist. Because if we know for a fact that Jesus died on the cross, then I think it's safe to assume that we know Jesus existed in real life. So it goes against those people. And like I said, if Jesus resurrected, if that's the argument that we're making, first of all, he has to die. So this is a good place to start. All right, so let's get into the second point. The second point of the evidence for the resurrection is that women were the ones that actually discovered the empty tomb. Now, when we first hear this, we kind of, we're like, why does that matter, if women were the ones that discovered the empty tomb? But the truth is, we need to understand that the testimony of women was actually very looked down. Just to give you guys a couple examples from people who actually lived in the first century or around that time period, we have one from Josephus, who was a Jewish priest, scholar, historian. He was a very important man in the first century. He kept a lot of records, and he actually goes as far as to say that women are unreliable when it comes to things of spiritual stuff because they're just so much more gullible than men. Women will just believe anything that you tell them if it has to do with spiritual stuff. So when it comes to testimony of women, especially when it comes to spiritual stuff, we just shouldn't believe them. Their opinions don't matter. It's useless. We have another source that comes from the Babylonian Talmud, which is actually just pretty much a collection of Jewish oral writings and teachings that were written down in a book. And in there, it'll go as far as to say that, when it comes to women's testimony, they kind of put it on the same level as like slaves, people that like to gamble, people who lend money with interest. I mean, I guess saying that they're not trustworthy people, but essentially it's bringing down the testimony of women to these people's same level. Imagine someone who's trying to gamble and like they're addicted to gambling. They're gonna say and do anything to be able to gamble. So in the same sense, that you wouldn't trust someone who's ready to gamble, with dice in their hands, the same way that you wouldn't trust a slave, you shouldn't trust women, is what they say. So I hope that with these two examples, it gives us a good mindset or mentality of how men looked at the testimony of women. So now we can explore this thought a little bit more when we're talking about how women were the ones that discovered the empty tomb. So when the disciples had to go preach that Jesus rose from the dead, that Jesus is risen, they also had to throw in the fact that women were the ones that discovered the tomb. And how's that going to make them look when they're out here preaching this? It's going to make them look, they're going to be embarrassed. People are going to laugh at them. Like, what? You're following the testimony of women? Like, what's wrong with you guys? But the truth is, this is actually what historians kind of use in order to add a little bit of credibility to the likeliness that this might be true. This is what's known as the criterion of embarrassment. Essentially, the idea goes like this. If someone is willing to tell you an embarrassing detail about themselves or throw in embarrassing information, it lends more credibility that actually happened. Now, obviously, it's not saying that it definitely happened 100%, but it makes it more likely that it happened. An example of this is, let's say I told you guys, like, yeah, I went to the gym and I was super excited, I was pumped, and I jumped on the treadmill, and after like a minute of like a light jog, I kind of just collapsed because I was exhausted, and I face planted on the treadmill and I fell back, and it was super embarrassing. If I'm willing to tell you guys that story that's going to make me look bad, there's a good chance that that's actually a true story, because me as a human being, why would I want to tell you guys embarrassing facts unless they actually happened? Like, even if it did happen, most likely I wouldn't want to tell you something embarrassing about myself anyway. But if I'm willing to tell you something embarrassing, you should take that knowing that, okay, there's a good possibility that this might actually be true. And that's the same thing that we see here, is that they had to preach that women were the ones that found the empty tomb. But yet, because it was the truth, they had to keep it. If they were going to make something like this up, they would have said, yeah, us men found it. Peter was the first one there. Peter ran and he was the very first one in the tomb. And, if they were making this up, they would say men found it, because that way more people would believe it. But when they're fighting against the culture to spread that, like, yeah, women kind of discovered the tomb, and people are laughing at them, well, at the end, it's embarrassing for them. But yet the reason they do it is because they want to preserve the truth. And that's what we see in the New Testament, is that the women discovered the tomb, the disciples spread the story in that manner, that the women found the tomb. It was against the culture, it was embarrassing for them, but yet because it was the truth, they did it. But the question is, why would they do it? Why would they tell a story about women discovering the tomb unless ... All right, so that's the first one. The second one we're going to talk about today is the idea that Jesus actually appears to 500 people, more than 500 people. And we read about this in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul is actually giving a early church creed talking about the way that Jesus appeared himself to the people. He appeared first to Cephas, to Peter, to the disciples, and to the women. Then he appeared to the 500 people. Then he appeared last of all to Paul. And this is what's known as a creed, because it was formatted in a way where it was going to be easy to say, easy to remember, easy to spread information, because we're talking about people that, they weren't writing the stuff down. This was an oral tradition. This was an oral, these people spread information, through words and stuff like that. So what the thing is, when we actually look back at the history, we can see that this creed might have actually developed within 3 years of when Jesus actually died on the cross, after Jesus died on the cross. So this information is being spread. People are telling, like, oh yeah, did you hear about this Jesus fella? He appeared to his 12 disciples, and then he appeared to these 500 people. And Paul goes as far to even let us know that these 500 people, most of them are still alive. He does say that some of them have passed away, but a lot of them are still alive. Why would he throw something in like that? The reason is so that way you can go ask them if you have questions. Hey, I heard that this Jesus guy appeared to you after he was crucified. Is that true? It's like, oh yeah, Jesus, yeah, you should have been there. It was amazing. He appeared before all of us and it was great. And the thing is, the reason this is important is because, like I said, I'm not trying to convince you that Jesus appeared before these 500 people. Historians have already done the hard work. Obviously, historians won't actually say that Jesus appeared before them, but they'll go as far as to say at least that these people believed that Jesus appeared before them. Now, the reason this is important is because, or the reason they believe this in a sense, is because a lot of these people, they were willing to die for their faith. They were willing to be tortured and punished and killed because they truly believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And that's what we can gather from these appearances, is that these people believed that they saw Jesus, and that's why they were willing to be tortured. A lot of times you'll hear people say that, people don't die for a lie. That's not necessarily true. The thing is, for example, Muslims, a lot of them do go on these suicidal attacks, because they're promised things like, virgins in heaven, and, they're going to go straight to heaven and be with Allah. And that's the reason they do it. And from our perspective, we're saying that they're doing those things for a lie. But here's the difference, though. Muslims, they believe what they're being told. They believe that that's what the Quran's telling them. That's what they believe that the elders or whoever, that the leaders are telling them. Like, hey, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And they're like, oh, wow, really? Like, well, I'm going to go do it. They're believing a lie. But the thing is, they don't know it's a lie. However, if we're talking about Christianity and we're talking about the first century, years after Jesus died, if Jesus didn't die, or if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, who's the one that started the lie? Well, the people that started the lie would be, the disciples, the early disciples. But yet, if they are the ones that started the lie, they would know it's a lie. So now we have to change the question. How many people would die for something that they know is a lie? So that's the difference. One group of people die believing a lie, believing that it's true, but yet but when it comes to the Christians, if it is a lie, they're the ones that know it's a lie because they're the ones that started it. So here's where we see the difference. If they started the lie and they were being crucified, or not crucified, well, some of them were, yeah, and tortured and punished, if you're trying to spread a lie and someone's willing to beat you up or torture you, what's the first thing you're going to do if you know that it's a lie? You're going to give up. You're going to be like, hey guys, I'm just kidding. It was all a joke. We made the whole thing up. But that's not what we see in the early church. We don't see Christians rebuking the faith or saying, oh, it was just a joke. We see them going all the way, dying. And this is actually something that we see in a letter from I want to say it's Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger was a ruler. I don't remember all the details, but essentially he was a ruler in an area, and he wrote to another place for another guy who was more experienced. He was asking for advice. He's like, "Hey, how are you guys dealing with these Christians? Like we're pretty much killing them, but we see that there's a lot of Christians. We want to know what to do. What's the best course of action?" So he's like, if they're willing to rebuke the faith or renounce their faith, like, should we let them go? What are you guys doing over there? And the guy responds back. He's like, yeah, that makes sense. If you're gonna kill them, and you give them the opportunity to renounce their faith and offer them the possibility or the chance to worship our gods instead, then yeah, just let them live. It's fine. So we know, at least in some point in time, that was a possibility. That if they were going to be crucified or if they were going to be tortured, we know that they had the possibility to renounce their faith and walk away alive. But that's not what we see. And I think that really speaks to what's happening here. Why is it that these people claimed that they saw Jesus, and then they were willing to die for Jesus? They were willing to be tortured and crucified and punished and have all these horrible things done to them. Why is it that they were willing to do that? All right, and the last one we're going to talk about today is actually what's known as enemies of Christ converting after his resurrection or after his death. Now, the first one's not really an enemy of Christ, but we're going to talk about him, and it's actually the brother of Jesus. His name was James. Now, the Bible doesn't flatly tell us that James didn't believe in Jesus, but there's a lot of indicators that kind of hint in that direction. One of them is that when Jesus's mother and brothers come to visit Jesus, they're like, "Hey, Jesus, your mother and your brothers are outside." And they're like, "Oh, well, who my real brothers are those who believe in me, and my real mothers are those who believe in me." So he's trying to make a point. He's not saying they're not my real mother and my real brothers, but he's trying to make a point. But obviously what he is saying is that, my real brothers are people that believe in me. The guy out there, he's my brother by blood, but he doesn't believe that I'm truly the risen Messiah. Another example that we get is when Jesus is on the cross. He talks to Mary, and then he has his disciple John, and he tells John, well, first he tells Mary, he's like, "Hey, this is your son, look after him." And then he tells John, "Hey, this is your mother, take care of her." But why does he do that? Well, the truth is because Jesus knew that his other brothers didn't believe that he was the Messiah. So he wanted his mom to be taken and looked after by godly men, by people that did believe the truth and people that did believe that he was the Messiah. And he knew that John the disciple did believe in him, so he would take care of her. He was more willing to trust his disciple John, who believed that he was God in the flesh, the Son of God, than his actual brother James, who was actually Mary's other son, you know? So I think those are just two hints that really kind of show us that James didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. That's the main point. There's another verse that says that a prophet in his own home is without honor. Essentially what this verse is saying is that a prophet, you know, someone who's used by God to do these mighty things, that whenever they go home to their hometown, they're going to be without honor. And the reason for that is because people aren't going to look at them as this man of God. They're going to look at them as like, oh, you know, is that Billy? Like, hey, Billy, how you doing? And they're going to run up to him like, hey, Billy, I remember when you were this tall. And they're going to be like, oh, yeah, I remember I used to change your diapers and remember all these things that we used to do. And they're not going to be able to look at him as this godly man because they're going to look at him as, you know, Billy, the son of John. I'm just making this guy up, but that's what they're going to look at him more as, you know, like, oh yeah, I grew up with this guy. I saw him grow up. You know, you're going to tell me this guy's the Messiah or this guy's a prophet? Like, no way. So, and that's what happens when, you know, prophets go home. So in the same sense, you know, James, being his brother who grew up with Jesus, he didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. If we go a step further, if I were to ask you guys this question, what would it take for you to believe that your brother was the Messiah? The reason I ask this is because the Jews, devoted Jews, they were waiting for the return of them, or for the coming of the Messiah. This is something they knew was going to happen. This is something they were expecting. So imagine you're growing up and your brother is saying like, hey, by the way, guys, I'm the Messiah. The guy that you guys are all waiting for, that's me. You know, you're going to kind of be insulted. You're going to be like, are you serious? Like, the Messiah is supposed to be this, you know, this godly figure, and you're pretending to be him? Like, that's insulting. Like, and then if anything, it's going to kind of grow resentment towards him. So, like I said, this is all kind of speculation, but I think there's good reason to believe this, that, you know, it kind of grew resentment and bitterness towards his brother because he was, in his eyes, he was pretending to be the Messiah, and he wasn't going to have that. He's like, no, Jesus, if you want to pretend to be the Messiah, you know, I can't be a part of that. So now, all that context aside, now having all that in mind, what would it take for James, after Jesus died on the cross, what would it take for him to believe that Jesus actually was the Messiah? ... I keep saying that because it's a rhetorical question, but I want you guys to fill in the blank. Okay, the second person we're going to talk about is actually the one who's more well known, which is Paul. Paul, beforehand, pretty much in the Greek in Rome, they had 3 names, and he chose to go by Saul, which is one of his Roman names. So he was going by Saul. His name was Saul, and he grew up, you know, under the best teacher to become a Pharisee. He grew up in a city where they were all about philosophy, and they were all about, you know, just learning things from other cultures. You know, Paul actually grew up in a city where knowledge was at the top priority. You know, learning, wisdom, top priority. And Paul learned under the very best teacher. You know, in Philippians, he tells us, he's like, yeah, you know, like, I'm a Jew, like 100%, you know, I was circumcised on the 8th day. You know, I did all this training. I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. He goes as far as to say. So he was super serious about all the Pharisee stuff, about all the, about God and learning and just keeping all the laws and stuff. So when he starts to hear word about this Jesus fella who's claiming to be the Messiah, well, he's going to take that the wrong way, you know? He actually goes and he starts persecuting these Christians, these people that believe in Christ, that he rose from the dead. He goes as far as, and he starts attacking them, and he starts persecuting them, and he gets authority from the leaders to start throwing people in jail, and he starts doing all this horrible stuff to the Christians. And he's on his way to Damascus, and he's on the road, and he's with 2 people, and all of a sudden, in the Bible, he writes that Jesus appeared before him, and that he saw Jesus, and that Jesus opened his understanding. And ever since that moment, he converts. And when he goes on his new journey to the Gentiles, that's when he decides to change his name to what most of us know him by, which is Paul. But here's the question, though. We see that he persecuted Christians in his early life, and then he does this radical transformation, this whole complete 180 to start, suffering, teaching the gospel. Paul went through some horrible stuff. He went through whippings, through lashings. He was imprisoned. He was on a boat. He went through shipwrecks. He went through all these horrible things, but he still kept doing it because he wanted to preach the gospel to the Gentiles, and to the Jews, the Jew first and then the Gentile. But the thing is, he went through a lot of horrible things, proclaiming that Jesus really was the Son of God, that Jesus was the Messiah. So here's the question once again. What would it take for someone who persecuted, who arrested, who beat up, who was there for public stonings of Christians? What would it take that guy after Jesus died? He didn't meet Jesus, or we don't know 100%, but we can't say that he met Jesus before his crucifixion. Although some people will say that. But anyways, the question is, without actually meeting Jesus, and he was persecuting the Christians after the death of Jesus, what would it take for him to go from persecuting persecuting the Christians, to giving his life, proclaiming that Jesus truly did die on the cross for our sins, and that he really was the Son of God? What would it take for him to make that radical change? ... So I want to give a quick recap, just because I don't want any of this stuff to go past you guys. The first one is that we know for a fact that Jesus died on the cross. The second one is that when the disciples were going out proclaiming that Jesus had risen from the dead, they did it based on the testimony of women. Women were the ones that first discovered the empty tomb, and when they were teaching, Jesus rose from the dead, they also had to throw that the women were the ones that discovered the tomb, even though that was against culture, even though that was embarrassing for them, but they were willing to do it because it was the truth. Then we have Christians who believed that they saw Jesus in the flesh, 500 as a matter of fact, who they saw Jesus, and then they were willing to die and be tortured, proclaiming that Jesus really was who he said he was, and proclaiming that Jesus was the Son of Man, or the Son of God. And, like I said, a lot of people would die for a lie. The thing is, if this really was a lie, they would be the ones that knew it was a lie. They were going to be the ones that knew it was a lie, and yet they were still willing to be tortured for all of this. The last one that we have is that enemies of Christ, people who didn't believe that he was the Messiah beforehand, they after Jesus died and rose from the dead, then they believed that he really was the Son of God, that he really was the Messiah. So what would it take to explain all of these things? And the thing is, this is actually what I want to end it with. Like I said before, it's not a matter of trying to convince you guys that these things happen. It's a matter of trying to explain what best explains all of these things. There's actually two things that I want to finish off with. I'll finish off with the other one first. There's something known as Occam's razor, which is the idea that when we're trying to find an explanation for something, it's better to go with something that's simpler, that still explains everything. Because the truth is, we can make a lot of excuses like, this could explain why that happened, and then this other thing completely different could explain why that happened, and then this other thing that has nothing to do with the other two things, maybe that explains why that happened. And what people have to do is throw all these different explanations to why maybe this happened. And like I said, we only went over 3 or 4. But there's a lot more things that we could have talked about, but we're not trying to be here for 2 hours, But the thing is, Occam's razor, what it tells us is that when we're looking at these things, at these explanations, sure, they explain it, but there's something simpler that explains it just as well, if not better. And an example of this in real life would be all right, let's say I'm at work, or let's say I show up late for work, and my boss is like, hey, why were you late? I could easily go, well, I actually woke up early. I wanted to surprise everyone. I wanted to buy them donuts and coffee and stuff. So I actually woke up early to go to Dunkin' Donuts and buy some donuts. But then on my way there, I ran over something. I got a flat tire. And then, it was early in the morning, so nobody was there to help me. And my phone, it actually didn't even charge last night, so I couldn't call anyone. So I had to walk to the nearest location and ask for a phone. And I didn't even know who to call. I didn't know anything. So then I had to call my buddy, and then he was actually all the way in Chicago. So he had to come and pick me up. And then together he took me to the store and we bought a new tire. And then we went back, and then I came back to my car, and then turns out that, somebody stole my car. And, you could make a list of all these things. And I'm not saying that it's not possible that actually happened. Because the truth is, there is a small possibility that what the story that you're telling could be the truth. But when we're trying to be reasonable human beings, when we're trying to be reasonable, we're not looking for just possibilities. We're looking for something that's the most plausible, something that explains this the best. So, sure, that's a possibility that all that stuff happened to me in the morning. But what's a better explanation? That I probably just overslept. And even though, like I said, even though it's not guaranteed that the fact that the idea that I overslept is the truth, it's more believable, it's more credible, and it does a better job of explaining what needs to be explained. So yes, we could come up with different excuses for why this happened, and then why that happened, and then why that happened, and then why that happened. But at the end of the day, nothing has a better explanatory scope and better explanatory power than the resurrection of Jesus, that Jesus actually rose from the dead on the third day, and that's why these things happened. The last thing I want to talk about before I throw it back over to Edgar is that, and the truth is, this is actually really interesting, because the Jews at the time, they weren't expecting a resurrection. An individual-based resurrection from the dead isn't something that was even on their minds. There were some people who expected a general resurrection at the end of the day, at the end of the time, when God would come for his people. And that's why they kind of protected the bones of the Jews that died. So that way they would be easy to find, and, they'd be at the center of the city and stuff like that. So they did expect a general resurrection, but as far as an individual resurrection, that was the last thing on their minds. The thing is, even if they did, it doesn't make any sense for them to steal the body and proclaim this message that Jesus rose from the dead, just like the scripture said that he would. It wouldn't even cross their mind to make a plan like that, because none of them were expecting a resurrection in the sense that Jesus resurrected. Now, Jesus told them several times, but they didn't grasp it. They didn't understand what Jesus was saying, and it's just, I think that we need to keep that in mind. Now, looking back, when we study the Old Testament, we can see that, that the Messiah was supposed to suffer, but the truth is, the Jews were confused about the whole Messiah, because there were some passages saying about how the Messiah was going to come on a cloud, and another passages saying how he was going to come on a donkey and he was going to suffer. And they're like, wait a minute, like what? Like, how can the Messiah do both? Maybe there's two Messiahs. Regardless, they couldn't figure it out. So, but now looking back at the information that we can look back and see all this stuff, and it's just, we can connect the dots. But as far as the Jews, the disciples, they weren't expecting a resurrection. So it wouldn't make sense for them to try convincing people that a resurrection happened. Now I've been speaking for a long time. I'm going to throw it over to Edgar. And Edgar, what do you have to say about all this? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know what? You mentioned something that I kind of thought about it right now. And that is, whenever, the Christians were persecuted by, well, it was entirely by Rome at that stage. But you mentioned something about they were willing, to give their lives for what they believed. And it was true. Like, we can hear about, really, really atrocities that happen, like having the Coliseum, and just sending a lot of Christian people there, and throwing the lions, them killing all of them or burning them and so forth, like just really, really bad ways of killing Christians. And it was all because they wanted to get that eradicated. They want to remove Christianity from the picture. But that wasn't happening. On the contrary, you would hear stories, like historians would put stories about like Christians praying in the middle of that event, you know, while they're going to be sliced maybe, or you know, just God knows what they would gonna do, you know, to them. But then I came into one thing, and maybe much of you might not know, but for those that might, at least, and this is because I've been studying a little bit more on this, but let's say with the Islamic faith, when it was, you know, starting up, when it was, you know, getting some momentum, there was certain people that started, you know, questioning whether this was true or not. What was the response with this? Well, they decided to start killing whoever denied the faith of Islam. So whoever was an apostate was going to die, and that was called dawah in the Arabic. So they were killing Muslims or ex-Muslims now for denying their faith, because that was considered like treason. Like, and so, but why would you have to kill people for something that it's the truth? Because they believe that's the truth. So why would you have to kill someone? You know, I don't hear this in Christianity. I haven't heard this about that. On the contrary, trying to kill Christians. So that just goes as far as to say, like, at least that's some sort of, you know, evidence, or maybe not fully evidence, but, you know, that's kind of weird, no? That if you're pursuing some truth, but then they don't believe anymore, you kill them. And so that just means how it does. And you can check out the rules in those Islamic states or Islamic countries where they use the Islamic rules. I mean, you can't deny the faith, otherwise you're going to be killed. That's period. And you can check that out. So I just thought that was kind of impressive how they were doing that to the Christians, and yet they were even praying at that moment. Yeah, well, you know, there's one more thing that, you know, like Steve Jobs said, you know, there's one more thing. And that's the Paschal wager. So, I mean, basically this sort of argument, it's a really good argument, I think, to give, you know, but before we present this kind of argument, we do want to make sure we present evidence before we make this argument. And the reason for it, if you want, I can talk about that, about Paschal wager, and then I'll explain why we want to give evidence first before actually going into the Paschal wager. So let's say, all right, Christianity, it's false. You know, let's not believe in that, because we know it's a fact that it's false. Every single one of them, it's false. You know, God doesn't exist and all of it. All right, we know that now. So what happens? You know, we live our lives however we like. We can do whatever we want. If we want to use a moral standard that suits ourselves, great. If not, great. Doesn't matter. We die. And we just, you know, decay in the ground, in the grave. That's it. Nothing happened. Everything goes on, right? But what if it, you know, let's put it hypothetically. What if it does? What if God does exist? What if Christianity is true? What if that's the actual truth? What if Jesus is the only way? So then now we got ourselves a problem if we don't want to believe in God, because now we know if God exists, there's a moral standard we have to go by, because there's a moral giver, And now we got to live by that standard. And now we got to believe Jesus is the only way. Repent and trust in him. Because otherwise we're going to go to hell, you know? And so if you go to hell, eternal punishment, maybe we don't want that. Maybe, you know, we want to live in that paradise that God has promised us if we believe in Jesus. And so what happens then now? So, you know, and that's Pascal's wager, you know, like, let's say it doesn't exist, you can die and nothing happens. But if he does, then you got to start asking the big questions. What should I do? You know, what should I do to inherit God's kingdom? So that's Pascal's wager. And, you know, just one other point of view that you can also see is that even if Christianity wasn't true, like what happens for us Christians, let's say? I mean, we don't really lose anything. At the end of the day, you know, I mean, I'm not doing things that I regret myself not doing. I'm living a life that I like, you know. So even if Christianity wasn't true, I wouldn't lose anything, nor any other Christian would lose anything, because they're living a life that, you know, it's compelling, you know, it's loving your neighbor more, like you love yourself, you know, helping others, and all these moral standards that we might have right now. But even in a world where, you know, Christianity wasn't true, we would still not lose anything. But on the contrary, as an atheist, for example, you would lose every single thing, because, or, you know, now whatever you thought it was, you know, made you happy, like drugs, like, you know, partying and all that, now you would have to conform yourself to what God tells you. But even further than that, if you live by that standard and never turn away from that, as I said, you'll lose everything, every aspect of your life, of your soul, and it'll all have been done in vain. So you would have had lived the life in vain. Whether you say, well, I lived happy and I did whatever I liked, and so I died happy. But it's not about only the death, or like the Bible says, you know, it's not about that first death. It's about what's coming up in the next, you know, once you're actually dead. So you got to put a little bit of emphasis into that as a Christian, you don't lose anything if God were to not exist. But as an atheist, you would pretty much lose every single aspect. And the reason why, as I said in the beginning, the reason why you don't want to, you know, come up with this argument right away, you know, in the conversation, is because you want to give some evidence. Otherwise, like, for example, like we were talking about the Islamic faith, what stops a Muslim to say the same thing, you know? If, you know, Islam wasn't true, then, you know, or what happens with any other, like Hinduism, like Buddhism, nothing stops them from saying the same Pascal wager into somebody, you know, that doesn't believe in that religion. So we want to put some evidence. So it's not just, you know, giving out an argument and that's it. We want to put these evidence so that, you know, we're actually now telling you an argument based on those on those evidence, or pieces of evidence based on a real foundation, and not just on thin ice.
Okay, well, I think we're gonna go ahead and end it here. Thank you guys so much for checking out this episode. I know it's a lot. I really hope that you guys really take the time to think about what we said. You know, like I said, there's still a lot more evidence that we could talk about, but these are some of the bigger points that we can hit. And there's a lot that really is at stake here. And I think it's just important for us to really sit down and take a moment to really think this stuff through, which I hope you guys will do. You know, take this seriously, because truly there's nothing more important than what we're talking about today. A quote that I read to you guys last week was, Christianity, if true, it's the most important thing in the world. Christianity, if it's false, it's the most insignificant thing in the world. The only thing Christianity cannot be is moderately important. We can't hold something like the truth of Christianity to this middle level. Because if it's true, a lot hangs on it, like Edgar was saying. And if it's false, well then, let's treat it like it's false. But to hang in this middle area, we have to make a decision. And like I said, I think there's really good reason to believe A, that God exists, and B, that He's revealed Himself through Jesus Christ and through the prophets and the apostles. And I think there's something that we really need to take serious. So thank you guys so much for checking out this episode. I hope you guys have a great day. Just a quick reminder that you guys can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and feel free to leave us a comment on our Facebook page. We'd really appreciate it. But with that being said, guys, thank you guys so much for listening. Take care and God bless.
God bless you.